when Blackjack was first discovered to be beatable by Ed Thorpe in the 60s, it was just a small-time game that was offered at a couple of tables in downtown Las Vegas. It was really not a major money generator for anybody. The fact that it's known to be beatable is what's responsible for this multi-billion-dollar industry. And at the higher levels, the casinos are aware of this. So they're not going to take the game away. They could have taken it away at any time. They could have just offered roulette instead, right? People play and people lose money because they know it can be beat. But they don't make it easy because they don't want too many people beating it. I'm actually maybe going to take a little aside now and do a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of math, if you guys are all right with that. Maybe on the whiteboard. Because I want to talk about what it means to have an expectation of 0.5% or 2% or whatever. What does it really mean? Because when you play a hand of blackjack, I mean, you either win or lose the whole thing, right? Sometimes you win or lose double when you double down the split. Sometimes it's 4 times the amount. The standard deviation on a hand of blackjack is 1.1 the amount that you're betting. Okay? Meaning it's a little bit more because sometimes you double. So when you play one hand and you have a 1% advantage, because the true count is 3, after the offset it's 2, and then it's a 1% advantage. And incidentally, when you do this card counting game, and you vary your bet a lot, and sometimes you have a big advantage, sometimes you play a table minimum, and you have a disadvantage, in aggregate, if you do a weighted average by the amount that you're betting at each time, with good rules, or decent rules, you're going to end up at about a 1% advantage overall. Like the average advantage of all the money you bet. You know, sometimes you have a 3% advantage and you're betting a giant amount of money, and sometimes, most of the time you have a 0.5% disadvantage and you're betting the minimum. Average it out, it's going to approach 1%. 1% is actually really good. Like with a small minimum, or if you're doing some back counting, sometimes you're not playing at all when it's negative, you're going to get to 1%. If you have a high minimum, you're going to have trouble getting past like a 0.5% advantage. But if you're playing a strong counting game or any kind of call-in game meaning you have people betting really small minimums here, and they're calling their buddy in who is the big player. That's what we usually like to do. So that your spread, your difference between your minimum and your maximum is much bigger. So essentially there's no minimum. Now, if you have a $500 unit and you're playing a $25 minimum, it's the same as playing a 0 minimum. It's just noise on your bankroll. If you have a $500,000 bankroll, $25 is nothing. So if you're able to do that, you're more likely to be playing at least a 1%, maybe even a 1.5% advantage game, meaning the average advantage of all the money you put up. So I'm going to go to the whiteboard a little bit and talk about what you might expect. Let's talk about the long term in terms of the number of hands that you play. So, with one hand, and let's say that you're betting $100 is your average bet, okay? Because you're playing $25 minimum to $50 units, and the average bet's about $100, and your average advantage is going to be 1%. So when you play one hand, your expected value, which is your expectation, is going to be $1. So this is number of hands. Okay? 1% average advantage. Okay? You play a hand and you expect to make $1. But what is your standard deviation? Standard deviation. Standard deviation is like, that's the plus or minus. Anytime you get an expectation, like right now, by doing a poll of 1,000 voters, they expect that Bush is going to get 48% of the vote, plus or minus 3%. They always have a plus or minus, because they're only polling 1,000 voters, and there's 50 million voters, or whatever, 100 million voters, and so there's always some plus or minus factor. That's the standard deviation. Sometimes the plus or minus they give you in a poll is 2 standard deviations. So the standard deviation on a hand of blackjack is 1.1 times the bet, so it's $110. Okay? So it's about $100. And intuitively that makes sense, because you usually win or lose that amount. Now let's say you play 100 hands. You've played for an hour and a half. maybe an hour heads up or 2 hours at the full table. You played 100 hands. Let's do the expectation of standard deviation. How much do you expect to win? If your average advantage is 1% and you're betting $100 a hand for 100 hands. $100. Now you expect to make $100. But can any of you figure out approximately what the standard deviation is after 100 hands of blackjack? The standard deviation in any kind of process like blackjack or any other large independence events rises as the square root of the number of trials. So you simply take the square root of this number, 100 hands, which is 10, times this original standard deviation, and so it's 1100. Or let's just call it 1,000, approximately. Call it 1K. So what does it mean? After an hour and a half of playing blackjack, varying your count, knowing that you have a 1% advantage, knowing for sure, trusting in yourself, trusting in your simulations, you think you've made $100, but in fact you've at least won or lost 1,000. So could you tell that you're playing a good game based on your results? What can you conclude based on your results? Let's say you played for an hour and a half and you lost $1,500. Does that mean that you're not playing correctly? Or the casino is cheating? It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything because it's about the standard deviation. So unfortunately, at this level, this is total noise still. Your expectation is very small compared to your standard deviation. And your results are indistinguishable from luck. There's nothing that you can do in a couple of hours that will guarantee that you're going to win. And so you should never look at your results after a couple of hours and try to draw any conclusion based on your results. But if you, instead of playing for a couple of hours, you play for a long weekend, okay, and you play 10,000 hands, okay, no, that's quite a long weekend.
Yeah,
but,
that's quite a long
yeah.
Let's make 500.
Well, then I'm just doing like easy square roots because I want to get to the long term here real quickly. But you can extrapolate. You just take the square root of this number and you multiply by that number and you get the standard deviation. So 10,000 hands, $1 a hand. You expect to win $10,000 plus or minus $10,000. Okay, so now you're getting to the point where at least you can sense it. Maybe it's a couple of months of play, whatever. Well, ideally you pool your bankroll with some other people. And then you get to these large numbers of hands much quicker, obviously, because you get to all play to the same bankroll. And now, it's still random. You can still lose money pretty easily, but it's much more predictable. So, but what does it mean to have one standard deviation of 10,000? It turns out that there's an exact relationship in terms of probabilities. In any kind of uniform distribution, law of large number states the probability of being within one standard deviation of your expectation is about 2/3. So you have about a 2/3 chance of being between $0 and $20,000 ahead in this scenario. And you have a 1/3 chance of being outside of that range. Meaning you only have a 1/6 chance, maybe a 16% chance of being down more than a whole standard deviation. So what that says is that after a few weeks of play and 10,000 hands have been played, or maybe a weekend if you do have a group of people, you actually only have a 1 in 6, a roll of the die chance of being down. Because you have to be a full standard deviation below your expectation before you're at 0. So you have a 1 in 6 chance of being negative, 1 in 6 chance of being up more than 20K, and a 2/3 chance of being between 0 and 20K. At this level, you start to have some sense of the fact that you're making money based on your results. But it's not a very definite sense, because you could still easily be down. But zooming way ahead to a couple of years of play, this is where you want to end up being, at 1 million hands. You expect to make $1 million, right? $1 a hand, $1 million. Because by the time you play 1 million hands, hopefully your bankroll is going to be bigger. Your end's going to be much more than 100 along the way. But if it stays at that level and if your percentage advantage stays at 1%, you're going to expect to make $1 million. And this is only 100,000, plus or minus. Because it's the square root of 1 million, it's 1,000 times the original $100, it's 100,000. Well, guess what? There's no more luck. Luck is gone. You expect to make $1 million plus or minus 100,000. You might make 850, you might make 1.2, but you're never going to make 400. Never at all. You've gotten to the long term. And in fact, you've gotten to the long term somewhere in between these two levels. Like here, you're well beyond, you're clearly, obviously, totally in the long term. You're absolutely certain of making money, and in fact, you're absolutely certain of approximately how much money you're going to make. You know that if you have a $500,000 win, you know that something is wrong. You weren't playing the game you thought you were playing. Something went terribly wrong. You can actually conclude that based on your win being too small. So that's sort of objectifying and explaining in terms of numbers what the long term means. And keep it in mind when you have a frustrating result and you haven't won what you think you should have. Or if you have a very good result, before you get all excited about what a great, amazing player you are, keep in mind just what your standard deviation might be. Try to estimate. Try to guess the number of hands you played. Yeah, very approximately. You can tell. You know if you're playing 30 hands an hour or 100 hands an hour because you can tell what kind of game you're playing, how crowded it is and how fast they are. There's software that you can run on a PC. Yeah. Casino Verite, it's on the order of 100. If you buy all the modules, it's like maybe $200 at the most. But you buy the software, and you run it on your computer, and it's just all those things you just told me, you plug it right in. It says how many decks, how many players, what kind of rules. You plug it right in, and it spits out expectation standard deviation. Okay, I'm going to start by talking about the basic card counting techniques that have been used since the 1960s by professional card counters and were somewhat perfected by the MIT team. Later I'll talk about the more advanced techniques that we developed just for ourselves. The basic notion of card counting relies on the fact that certain cards, in particular tens and aces, the high cards in a shoe, help the player a little bit more than they help the dealer. Now, in some situations, a 10 or an ace can help the dealer as well. I mean, if the dealer gets blackjack, you're going to lose. But when a player gets blackjack, you get 1.5 to 1 odds on your winnings. And when a dealer gets blackjack, you just lose your money. And so if there are more blackjacks in general for both the player and the dealer, you're going to end up doing better. You're going to end up winning because you get the extra half a bet every time you get a blackjack that the dealer doesn't get when you lose a bet. We have to begin by playing basic strategy. Basic strategy simply means that for every combination of your two cards and the dealer's up card, you make the correct decision. And there's a chart that tells you how to play for any particular combination of hands. So for instance, if you have a 12 against the dealer 3, you're going to hit that hand. And if you had a 12 against the dealer 4, you look it up on the chart and you're going to stand it. And this chart is the same at this point in most books that you get. I mean, it's a well-known piece of information that was derived by running billions and billions of hands on computer simulations. Playing exact basic strategy will actually lower the casino advantage to a fraction of a percent, to about 0.5% or so. Whereas if you are an average player, the casino might have a 3 or 4% advantage against you. Just playing this chart accurately, memorizing this chart and always playing it perfectly, will cut that down to a fraction of a percent. And then the card counting will take you to that next level and actually give you a fraction of a percent advantage over the casino. So let's begin by just playing a couple of hands and playing basic strategy. So here we go. That's the example I just said. 12 against the 2. You look it up. Example I just said. 12 against the 2. You look it up, and it says hit. So you take a card and bust. Pair of 6s against the 2. You look it up, and it says split your 6s against everything up to a 6. You're going to be more likely to split hands, to double hands, and to stand hands against little cards. Because when a dealer has a little card up, he's more likely to bust. There are 4 different kinds of 10s in the deck, so the most likely card he may have underneath is a 10. So you're sort of counting on having a 10 underneath and maybe busting with the 10 and thinking that he has a higher chance of busting this than if he had a 7, 8, 9, 10. And so that's why you end up putting extra money out, splitting these 6s. 16, you're going to stand by the same logic. And another 16. And the dealer has 13. Too many. Dealer busts, player wins. So let's play 2 hands again. So now we have a 13 against a 9. A 13 is one of these stiff hands. And with the stiff hands, you generally hit them against the high cards and stand them against the low cards. And just to double check, because it's very important to get it perfect. It's one of these things where if you're playing 95% of it correctly, but occasionally make a mistake, you're actually going to lose quite a bit of money. Before you can use that small effect of card counting, you have to have absolutely perfect basic strategy.
it's not enough to know, almost all of it. You have to get every bit of it right. And you can get it printed out in a little card and even take it out on the table. It's like completely fine. Just don't buy the little card in the casino gift shop, because it's going to be almost correct, and there's going to be 1 or 2 mistakes on it typically. So 13 against the 9, we're going to hit that and bust. So this got 12, 15, too many, and this guy wins. So it's very straightforward. And that's how it goes with basic. You just have to keep doing it no matter what kind of blackjack strategy you're employing, whether you're counting cards and doing one of our advanced techniques, you're always playing basic strategy as your absolute basis. You have to memorize this chart cold. The advantage that the counting gives you is a second order effect. In the first order, for the first approximation, the extra tens and aces give the dealer more blackjack also. So it's only because when you get the blackjack, you get 1.5 times your bet, whereas when the dealer gets a blackjack, you only lose 1 time your bet. That's actually close to half of the advantage right there. But let's try just a little bit of playing. So like throw out a chip or whatever. You can say these are $100 chips. You want to just sort of each play a hand to start. No. So we're going to try doing a high-low count. Some of you guys do different or more advanced counts, and that's fine. Just you can stick with your own. But we're gonna do the high-low here. And the way that the high-low works is that 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are +1. Okay. And tens and aces are -1. You start at 0. Little card is defined as suited for 6, and the tens and aces are the good cards. So you add, when you count, you actually add 1 for the little ones, and then you subtract 1 for the tens and aces. The reason being that when the little cards come out, it means that there's extra tens and aces left, and so it's good, so you call it positive. So when you see a big card like that, you say minus. It started at 0, so now it's -1. Right? And you just do a running count as ideal. If you're a beginner counter, it's really important to actually mentally sort of say the count to yourself with every hand played, because the dealer's going to announce totals. They're going to say 11, doubling down, 16. So it's very easy to go to 6 instead of 5, because it sounds like 16 or something. So you have to really say, like, the count is 5 and I have a 16. And you need to be aware. One thing that people who are learning to count often do is they stop adding up the totals. They're so busy counting that they expect the dealer to keep the totals for them and to sort of play the hand for them. And the dealers are always very happy to play a hand for them with almost correct basic strategy, because that's what the dealers know. They know almost correct basic strategy. It turns out that those couple of basic strategy mistakes totally eat away whatever advantage you get by counting. The basic is first. You have to play perfect basic, essentially. You can make maybe 1 mistake every 20 shoes. That's about it. You really can't make basic mistakes very often. There are different ways of doing it, practically different ways of doing it. For example, you could try to count as ideal each card. So it's +3. You can do 3, 4, 3, clean it up.
Don't let him get
4,
away.
3, 2, 3, 2, 1, 0, -1. So that's one way of doing it. Okay. Another way of doing it would have been to look away from the table while they're dealing. Because if you're always staring at the cards in the same way, it's going to be pretty blatant. You want to be able to count in any one of different ways. So you could just look away from the table, and then you can look at it after all the cards are down. And the first thing you probably look at is the blackjacks, because they're getting picked up very quickly, right? Because you get paid. You get paid on that blackjack. So it gets picked up. And you started at 3, so now you're going 1. You're thinking 1, and you know you haven't counted anything else. And now you just sort of try to group it, okay? Yep, there's another one. And that's the other thing you have to do. You actually have to sometimes remind them to pay, because they will sometimes forget. And strangely enough, they tend to forget in ways that hurt you, not in ways that help you. Because if they do forget in a way that helps you, the pit boss usually notices. But rarely does a pit boss notice when it goes the other way. He's always distracted doing something else. That's just how it works. So that's -1 with the blackjacks. And then you just sort of look at them, and you see, well, this is neutral, right? And you just group. You see, aha, these cancel. A positive, a neutral, and a negative, they cancel. And these cancel. And these cancel. And these are neutral. And that's how you think. You kind of look for patterns. You look for groups to quickly count the whole table. And that's kind of another way of counting. You want to be good at both of them. And now you've arrived at -1, and you play the rest of these hands. Okay, so you guys are all standing? Yeah, standing? Okay. 17. So it's still -1. And now I'm going to play this hand, take that. Okay? When you're practicing counting, you have to do payoffs. Very few people realize that. They practice counting, just dealing cards as fast as they can, and they assume, well, we know how to do payoffs. Well, guess what? The process of doing the payoffs correctly distracts from the counting. So you have to be able to actually do all the payoffs and keep the count, and still know that it's -1, while checking the totals. And when you actually start getting ready for playing seriously, you always want to have someone else, sort of what we call do a checkout, check you out before playing. And that person is going to deal to you, and hopefully they can also know how to count a little bit so they can check your count. If they don't, you can check it yourself. But their main job is to try to actually rip you off, is to try to pay you off wrong, is to try to do something wrong. And you need to prove to yourself, and presumably to them, that you're able to be aware of the entire game, know everything is happening while counting. It's not enough just to count independently. You have to do both. And it actually does come fairly quickly. Most people within a couple of months of doing this, maybe 3-4 times a week for half an hour, you can do it really effectively. It doesn't take that super long. You don't have to do it 8 hours a day in order to get good at it. It's very quick. I mean, just a week you're going to be able to keep a count accurately without playing. And then a few months to actually play and count at the same time. When you're first learning it and you pick up one deck of cards and you just go over, you start at 0, you got to end at 0. That's how you know that you're doing it right. And you can make a mistake and still end up at 0 just randomly, but if you end up at 0 time and time again, you're doing it right. The count that we're using is called the running count. But the count that is directly correlated to your casino advantage is the true count. What that means is that you take the running count and you divide by the number of decks still remaining in the shoe. Because the running count is just the number of extra tens and aces, extra picture cards. But you're not actually interested in the number, the absolute number of extra tens and aces. You're interested in the number of tens and aces per deck remaining. Because that speaks of the richness of the high cards, right? What's your chance of getting an extra 10 and ace on the very next card depends on how many extra per deck, how rich it is. So that's why the division. And in this case, you take running 3 and you divide it by about 5. Because this is a 6-deck shoe. You see there's 1 deck here, so there's 5 decks left. A little, 4 3/4, whatever. Well, 3 divided by 5 is less than 1. And it turns out that it's not enough. Your best guess. It looks like a little more in a deck here, a deck and a quarter. I'm going to say together with this card is a deck and a half, so I'm dividing by 4.5.
You can say 5 decks?
You can just call it 5 decks. It won't make a difference. Dividing by 4.5 divided by 5 is the same thing. When you're near the cut card, dividing by 1.5 and dividing by 2 is very different. It turns out that how the other players play their hand does not affect your advantage at all.
In long term, maybe.
In any term. In long term and short term at all. It's an illusion. It's one of the many, many, many counterintuitive illusions that you get. It feels like it does. You're sitting here, and this guy, he hits his heart 17, because he's a knucklehead, and he hits a heart 17, and he busts it with a 6, and you have a 15, and you would have gotten that 6, and now you bust a 15 with a 10, and you're like, why did you do that? Right. It doesn't matter, because he's just as likely to take out a card that helps you as a card that hurts you. Well, on any particular hand, it's going to affect the result, but how it affects the result, you can't predict. You do not... Each card, the cards are in here, they don't exist. They're blank, they're the back of the card. You don't know what the next card is going to be until the dealer turns it over. It's equally likely to be, any of the cards that are in there, right? So when a person does the wrong play, they're not hurting you. His making the right or wrong play affects his results. They don't affect your results. Your results are independent of his results. It affects it as much as the count does. So when he pulls out cards, the count changes. And if the count goes up, maybe you'll start splitting. If it goes down, you won't. But it only affects it based on the fact that that one card is no longer in a shoe. So now, see, the count is 13, and the total is 14. So you really got to keep it separate in your head. Count is 13, count is 13, Too many. Count is 13. 11, doubling down. Count is 14. 12. 18. Count is 15. Too many. Count is 14. 12. Too many. Count is 13. Right? And the count is 12. And so everybody loses stuff. Which is, what happens most of the time. When the count rises, you tend to lose. Right? Because why is the count rising? It's because little cards are coming out. Little cards help the dealer more than the player. By how much? Not by that much. You don't lose every time, but you might lose 2/3 of the time when the count is rising, and win 2/3 of the time when the count is falling. You see? Why do you bet when the count is high? Because you expect it to start falling. And that's when you make money, when it's falling, not when it's rising. It's an important distinction. It turns out that in terms of percent, your advantage, which is originally, let's say, 0.5% in favor of the casino with perfect basic strategy, it varies by 0.5% with each true count. So for every extra 10 of ace per deck, for every extra true count, the player's advantage improves by 0.5%. It's very close to a linear function. When the true is 0, the casino advantage is 0.5%. When the true is 1, it's a break-even game. When the true is 2, the player has a 0.5%. When the true is 3, the player has 1%. So how do you convert from true? Well, first you have to subtract the offset, the original casino advantage. Because the casino advantage is 0.5%, we're going to play it as a true minus 1 game. What does that mean? It means that you have to subtract 1 from the true to get to your actual advantage. Because the one true, which is 0.5% in terms of advantages, is what the casino starts with. So until you get to a true plus 1, you're playing a negative game. A true plus 1, you just break even. So that's why you subtract 1 from your true, and then you bet based on what's left. And what do you bet? You bet units. You have to calculate a betting unit. Your betting unit depends on your bankroll. And it's not related directly to the table minimum, for instance. So the amount that you were betting up to now is the table minimum, or your minimum. The less it is, the more money you're going to make. Sometimes you have to bet more than the minimum because of camouflage, because you don't want to bet too high. You might have reasons why you bet more, but it's as little as you can get away with. Your unit is simply a fraction of your total bankroll. That's how much you bet per true after subtracting the offset. Okay? So it's theoretically, the unit is the amount of money that you want to risk for each 0.5% advantage that you have. Okay? And the absolute theoretical maximum on that would be about 0.5% or 1/200th of your bankroll. So, a typical bankroll for, I think, students of the seminar tends to be on the order of $50,000, sometimes $20,000. For some people, it's a few $100,000. But let's say you have a $50,000 bankroll. Well, just divide. 50 divided by 100, right? $500, and then divided by, to be pretty conservative, another 5. So you can use a $100 unit. That would be very conservative. The most aggressive unit you would use with a $50,000 bankroll would be about a $200 unit. And that's about the range. You're not going to go outside of the aggressive unit you would use with a $50,000 bankroll would be about a $200 unit. And that's about the range. You're not going to go outside of those numbers. You pick a unit before you start playing. You think about your bankroll, you divide by 400, by 500, by something in that range. And you stick with it. And the only time you change your unit is if you have a very large swing. Or if you're playing on a team with someone else, and maybe your teammates are playing in a different city, but they're calling on the phone and they say, I just had a huge loss, and now our bankroll is not 50,000, our bankroll is now only 30,000, because I lost everything I had with me. And then you do have to change your unit then. But usually you only change your unit in between trips. Except, where every once in a while you have such a large swing that you need to change your unit in the middle of a trip. But certainly not in the middle of a shoot. Because it would be too many things to keep in your head to be changing your units as well. So your unit's a fixed number, and let's say it's going to be $100 to true. Well, how do you calculate how much to bet? The true is 3, because it's 12 divided by 4, so it's 3. You subtract 1 for the offset to make up for the original casino advantage. So now the true after the offset is 2. And you just multiply that by your unit. $200. $100 unit times 2 is $200. That's the right bet on one hand. And if you want to play 2 hands, you bet a little bit less on each one. But that's how you calculate it. Ideally, your minimum is not much more than your unit. Okay? It could be a little more than a unit sometimes. You prefer the minimum to be much less than your unit. You prefer If you have a $20 unit, you really want like a $10 minimum or $5 minimum. So to calculate the offset for a particular set of rules, look up the rules on the website. It'll give you a percentage. Double that percentage to convert to trues, and add a half a true for your error rate. And that's how, with good rules, you get a true minus 1 game. Because the 1/4%, double it to get to trues as half a true, add the half a true error rate, and you get true minus 1. You get a full true offset. So with good rules, you play true minus 1. With bad rules, you play true minus 1.5. Pretty much, that's the range. So anyway, so that's how you calculate your offset. And you do, just like a unit, you do that ahead of time. You hopefully know what the rules are, and when you come in, when you sit down, you know your unit, 100 to true, you know your offset is minus 1. So you're playing this 100 to true minus 1 game, true game. That's what we call the game that you're playing. That's how you can describe it to a computer later on to try to figure out how much it's worth. So I think it's good to know what the optimal bet is, and then if you're not going to be accurate, maybe you're not going to be exactly accurate anyway, but at least you're starting out with the optimal amount, and then you make some error from there. But if you start off being off by $100, and then you make another error of $100 because you thought it was 2 decks here, but it's actually 2.5, you might have a weaker game. So we found it's better to actually do the offset, multiply by the unit, but use a high-low count. On the other hand, you're using more advanced count, so you're probably occupying more of your mind with the counting, and maybe you have less mental energy to do the offset, and we find that it's better to do the offset. You might be playing it with or without numbers variation, meaning the numbers, when I say numbers variation, I specifically mean changing the basic strategy based on the count to get that extra 15-20% advantage over just varying a bet. There's one numbers play that you do have to make immediately, and you can't wait until you're good, because it's a much bigger effect on your advantage, and that is the insurance decision. Okay, you should not take insurance off the top, but if the true count reaches 3, you have to take insurance. And it's actually a very costly mistake not to take it at a true above 3. Okay?
So the true count is 3 or
3 or higher, if you take insurance. And that's your first numbers variation, right? That's the most important one. And then when you start learning them, you just start adding a few at a time. You don't memorize the whole chart. You might look at like the little numbers, the 1, 2, 3. Numbers up to 3 are the ones you sort of add first, because those counts happen pretty often. So you look at the 8 against a 5 and a 6, and you see that you can start doubling it with a true count of 2 and 3 respectively. So you kind of keep that in mind, and when you get the 8, you go ahead and double before you've learned all of the numbers. There's a few surrender numbers that are important too. If you have a game of surrender, and you have a true 3, you're going to surrender 15 against 9 and an ace. You're going to surrender 14 against a 10.
Where's the true count of this?
Okay, let's go over that again. It's a pretty important chart. Your total is on the left,
Right.
dealer's total is on the top, and the numbers in the middle of the chart.
Oh, exactly.
The number is the true count above which you make a strategy variation. So you play basic up to that point. Above that, you vary. The true of 8, you start surrendering. That's how you read the chart. This is the true count at which you start doing the variation. What the variation is? Well, on the surrender numbers, the variation is to start surrendering. So notice that the 16 against the 10 is a -1, meaning when the true count is above a -1, you start surrendering. Because basic is to surrender, because the basic is 0, which is above -1, so you surrender. Let's just play it out. We said it was 13, I believe. So we won't quite split yet. 7s we do split. 17, and the count is 12. 13, and the count is 13. And you're going to stand that, of course, against the 6. You're going to stand that, you're going to stand that. Dealer has 16, the count is 12. Dealer busts, the count is 11. So everybody's a winner. They might play it like that. Now it probably is 2.5. It was 3 last time we played sort of full round here. 11 over 2.5 is more than 4, so you're going to play more than 3 units. You always subtract 1. So a little more than $300. So now just keep counting. It was 11. And yeah, let's try counting the way you were suggesting. these kind of cancel out. These all cancel, and this is kind of the one that's left. In my mind, like, this is a neutral, I ignore them. Cancel, cancel. This all canceled, and this canceled. See? 1, 2, 3, 4. And so it's now 10. It drops 1.
Right.
The count is 10. Alternatively, I could have just very quickly went 11, 12, 11, 10, 9, 10, 9, 9, 8, 9, 9, 9, 10. And I could have arrived at the same number. Otherwise, if you get very good at this, you can count no matter how fast they deal. Yeah, absolutely, you can count. And in fact, I prefer it when they deal very fast.
Yes.
It's easier to count for me because I get it out of the way. They deal around and it's done, and I have the number. I don't have to go look and do the cancellation. Sometimes when they go very slowly, you're likely to forget the count in the middle. Cause so you should be able to be independent of how exactly they deal. It's too much of a handicap to have to look for the dealer that deals a certain way. Because when you start talking about advanced games very soon, you'll see that we're going to be selecting dealers on a bunch of other criteria other than just how fast they deal. So it's 10, 17, 9, 4, 14, 9 and 19, it's 10 again, it's 10, these are good, and a 6, 14, still 10, 18, it's 11. 14, it's 12, 21. Hopefully you know that it's 12 right now. I mean, it's very easy to get confused and think that it's maybe 14, because there's a 14 here, but it's 12, and you've lost. Well, what makes someone a professional is not the amount of time that they're playing. What makes someone a professional is being professional around the way that they do it. It's having rigorous rules. Checkout procedures are a big part of professionalism, meaning you don't just go and play. Someone in your group, it could be your wife, it could be just a group of one person, but hopefully it's a bigger group than that. Someone actually checks you every time to see how many mistakes do you make. Do you make too many, or do you make the right amount, the acceptable amount of mistakes? And then maybe they watch you in a casino. And there's a lot of procedures that professionalize your play. Because a professional blackjack player is simply one who trusts the simulations. It's one who knows. At the end of the day, the only thing that makes one professional is being able to say with certainty what your expectation was and what your standard deviation was over the previous so many years of play. And when you can say that, then you could in fact make the conclusion that, no, this is impossible, I can't be down right now, the casino is cheating, something is wrong. You can make that conclusion. Or in the case of a team of people, like we had, the conclusion may have been that, this person is ripping us off. He's lying to us. He's actually stealing this money and not losing it. That's something that has occurred, unfortunately. Very rarely, but it has occurred. A professional player, with no exceptions, keeps records of all his action. If you're not keeping your records, there's no way that you're a professional, because you never know whether you're winning or losing, or whether you're lucky or good. So it means that every time you play, you at least write down how much you won, how much you lost, and try to guess what your expectation was. You can run Casino Verite. You can try to estimate the value of the game. We were very precise about it. We actually wrote down how many exact shoes we played, how many other players were at the table, when the dealer, how deep the cut was. We wrote down everything. We went to the bathroom every half an hour, wrote down every single factor we could, plugged it into a simulators, and got very exact results for expectation and standard deviation. You don't have to do that. But you should have an estimate. You should have an approximate value for what you think you expect to have made. As you become a better player, and as you start betting more, you're going to start getting attention. Okay, when you're betting even a $100 unit, you usually don't get any attention in the bigger casinos here. But if you have a $400 unit, you're going to get a lot. It's at the level where the attention begins. And so you're going to have to get very good at having cover logic. Especially certain plays like splitting tens is kind of it's a little bit of a giveaway for card, because some casinos know that who splits tens. Well, terrible players split tens, and card counters split tens, and nobody in the middle splits tens. So if you're gonna split, you should split tens sometimes. It's not a common play. It doesn't happen very often, but when it happens, it's a very powerful play, and you miss a lot. You lose out on a lot of money by not splitting them because you're afraid that you'll get labeled as a card counter. So what do? You convince them that you're the terrible player. But why aren't you playing terribly all the time? Well, you need some logic. Because right now, there's a full moon and the cocktail waitress has dropped that drink, and therefore you have to have some reason or maybe it's because you lost 3 hands in a row or whatever. Just you have to sort of verbalize and explain your logic so that you blend in and look like the kind of guy who every once in a while does a crazy play for some crazy reason. And they buy it. It doesn't really matter what the reason is. They're used to having people justify their actions. And in general, camouflage play is not that effective. How you act matters much more than what you do. The people who work for casinos tend to think in terms of stereotypes. Okay. So if they just label you as they have to sort of, once you start betting, when you're betting small, just keep your mouth shut and play quiet, and they won't notice you. When you're betting big, that's not an option. They're going to notice you. They're going to say, oh, so where are you staying? Would you like a suite? You know, they're going to know you. They're going to want your name. You know, you can't not give them your name when you're the biggest player in the casino. That's just not going to fly. So therefore,
it's easy to find a counter here in the United States.
You know, it turns out that if you just convince them of a story, if you blend into some image that they have, they're going to love you and they're not going to watch you. Very few of them know how to count. Very few of these tables have real software set up that can actually check everything you're doing. It's not there yet. Typically, if they're suspicious, they're going to find out what you're up to no matter what. No matter how much you can make an incorrect play, it won't help you. If they're really suspicious and they think that you're a card counter, they're going to kick you out. And you should just leave. You've screwed up already. You've already lost. You've got to be someone in their minds that's an innocuous gambler. They've got to love you. You've got to think that you're just another guy who's going to lose all his money. And how do you do that? You have a story. You have an act. You have to sort of let them know why you're in a casino. I was usually an arms dealer. This is like falling apart mid-90s, and I was this young guy. I always had like several ladies on both sides, and I had a certain image, and I played to the image. And so a lot of them just wouldn't look at my play. I did some pretty blatant things, but like they didn't. I mean, eventually they did. But that's okay. If you win enough, you get kicked out. I find that acceptable.